Hi, I'm Adeline. I wore my sister's torn hand-me-downs, ate the scraps they scraped off her plate, and was told I should be grateful. On my 14th birthday, my mother said, "Don't act like a victim. You're lucky we didn't give you away." Now I own a beach house. But last week, she looked around my living room and whispered, "This would be perfect for your sister and her family." I just smiled and made one phone call. What happened next? Let's just say, some people learn the hard way what silence really means. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. The late afternoon sun spilled into the open kitchen, painting the quartz countertops in warm gold. I stood at the island, gently stirring a pot of tea, my back to the three people seated out on the deck. Through the tall glass doors I could hear waves lapping softly against the shore, but even the ocean couldn't quiet the noise in my head. This was the first time my family had come to see the house. Not when I signed the deed, not when I spent months rebuilding it from a hurricane-ravaged wreck into the kind of place people paused to admire from the beach. No calls, no congratulations, just silence, until word got around in town. Now suddenly, here they were. "Mommy, look!" Maya's voice cut through the quiet like a bell. "They have seashells stuck in the floor." I smiled at her curiosity. She was the only innocent one here. 7, bright-eyed, always clutching a stuffed dolphin to her chest. Callista didn't respond. She was busy scrolling through her phone, legs crossed on my outdoor chaise like it had always been hers. She looked up for a moment, gave a half smile in my direction, then muttered to no one in particular, "A little modern, huh? I remember when you couldn't even toast bread without setting off the smoke alarm." I didn't flinch. I just poured the tea, calm and steady. My mother said nothing, but her eyes, they moved like she was touring a model home, measuring the walls with her gaze, running her fingers along the edge of the window frame. Not a word about how proud she was, not a single, "You did well, Adeline." "Tea?" I asked, interrupting her mental appraisal. She turned, finally meeting my eyes. "Oh, sure. Something herbal, nothing too bitter." Of course. I poured it into the plain white cups she liked. But when it came to mine, I reached for the chipped teal mug tucked at the back of the cabinet. It had a worn handle, a faded swirl of paint, and a hairline crack at the rim. The only thing I took from the house I grew up in. It used to sit forgotten on the back shelf above the washing machine, right next to the cheap powdered detergent. I once rescued it from a garage sale box. My mother scoffed when she saw it in my college dorm years later. "You brought that thing?" she'd said. "Why would anyone keep junk like that?" But to me, it was the only piece of home that didn't come with strings. I carried the tray out and placed it on the low table between them. Callista didn't look up. My mother took her cup, still scanning the space. "This porch gets a lot of light," she said. "You know what would look lovely here? A playpen. Maybe even one of those toddler pools." I said nothing. "I'm not having kids," I reminded her gently. She waved it off. "Not for you. I meant for Callista. For Maya. You have all this space. It's too much for just you, don't you think?" My jaw tensed. Callista finally looked up, her voice light but sharp. "Yeah, and think how much easier school runs would be from here. Ocean View Elementary is 5 minutes away." I sipped my tea. The chipped mug warmed my hands, and I remembered. Being 10, watching Callista unwrap a brand new dress on Christmas while I got her old jeans, still stained at the knees. Mom said, "You should be grateful. Not everyone gets nice hand-me-downs like these." Grateful. When Callista got seconds, I got leftovers. When she missed curfew, it was a joke. When I stayed out 10 minutes late, "You'll never be trusted again." I was the invisible daughter, the one who made herself smaller, the one who learned to earn love in teaspoons, then blame herself when it never came. Now here I was, 38, in my own home, with a deed in my name, a mortgage I paid, a kitchen I designed, and my mother was already offering it to someone else. I heard her voice again, clear as ever. "This place, it would be perfect. You know, for Callista and the kids, it's too big for you alone anyway." She didn't even flinch, Didn't even say it like it was a suggestion, more like a decision that had already been made in her mind. I froze. The chipped mug trembled just slightly between my fingers. I steadied it against the table. Silence hung like humidity in the air, thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. I didn't look at her. Not yet. Instead, I looked out at the ocean. Its horizon stretched endlessly like freedom, like escape. My voice stayed quiet, but inside something cracked. This wasn't new. This was just another verse in the same old song. I give, she takes, I build, they claim. But this time, something was different. I turned slowly and looked straight at her. She was still smiling, that expectant smile, the one that had always said, "You know what to do." I smiled back, but mine wasn't soft. It was quiet, calculated, and final. Then I picked up my phone from the armrest beside me, scanned my contacts, pressed a name. The dial tone rang once, then again. That's when my mother said without flinching, "It'd be perfect for your sister and her family." I just stared at her, my tea trembling in my hand. Not from nerves, no, those had long since calcified into something harder, but from sheer restraint. The chipped teal mug, warm from the tea, now felt oddly cold against my skin. I gently set it down on the coaster, the soft clink a punctuation mark to everything I'd kept quiet about for years. "Why exactly?" I asked, my voice calm and low. "Would my home be perfect for Callista?" I didn't look at her when I said it. I stared at the ocean instead. The water knew how to hold silence better than any of us ever did. Mom let out a breath like I was being difficult already. "Oh, Adeline, don't start." She waved her hand in that dismissive way she always did when she wanted to move past something she had no intention of apologizing for. "You always read too much into things. You were born so independent. Even as a little girl. Callista, on the other hand, well, she's had a rough year." "Rough year." Right. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I waited. Callista, who'd been pretending to inspect a piece of driftwood art on the shelf, turned toward us with that sheepish shrug I'd seen her perfect in the mirror growing up. "It's just, things didn't go as planned." "Oh, don't make it sound like a catastrophe," Mom cut in quickly. "It's just a small setback. Her husband made a few unfortunate financial decisions and, well, the house was foreclosed on last month." So there it was, not even wrapped in shame, just served up casually, as if it were my duty to absorb their misfortune, again. "We thought," Mom went on, "maybe staying here a few months would help them get back on their feet. You have all this space, after all." My fingers curled around the edge of the deck chair. So this visit wasn't about seeing me. It never had been. It was a prelude to a permanent occupation, a silent assumption that I, as always, would yield. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on my knees. "You could have told me that from the beginning." "I didn't want to burden you," Mom said, as if that was ever a concern of hers. "You have so much going on." "I knew," I said simply, "about the foreclosure." The words floated there between us, heavier than anything else said that afternoon. Callista stiffened. "How—" "Your realtor called mine. Thought I might be interested in buying the place. She didn't realize we were sisters." The silence was absolute. Even the breeze outside seemed to pause. "I didn't tell you," Callista said, "because I didn't want your pity." I raised my eyebrows. "Then you sent Mom to ask for charity on your behalf?" She didn't answer. From inside, tiny footsteps padded across the tile. Maya appeared at the sliding glass door, her small hand pressing against the glass before she opened it with a push. "Look what I found," she said, holding up a tiny spiral shell, still damp with salt. I stood and walked to meet her, kneeling so we were eye level. She dropped the shell into my palm. "It's pink on the inside," she said proudly. "I think it's special." I smiled and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "It is. You have a good eye." She looked past me at the grown-ups, then whispered, "Is Mommy mad?" "No, sweetheart. Just adult stuff." Nothing for you to worry about. I leaned closer, voice low. You didn't ask to be born into this mess. I got you, okay? She nodded, unsure of what that meant, but comforted all the same. Then she skipped off, chasing after a lizard on the deck. I straightened up slowly, then walked into the kitchen without saying another word. The tile was cool under my bare feet, grounding me. I picked up my phone from the counter and scrolled briefly. Found the contact. Hit call. Hi, I said, my voice steady. Yeah. I'm going to need you to join us here, tonight, if possible. The guest list has changed. I hung up, then took a moment, just a moment, to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because sometimes silence wasn't noble. Sometimes it was just consent. When I returned to the deck, the sun was beginning to lower itself toward the horizon, casting amber stripes across the floor. I walked past them, grabbed a light shawl from the arm of the chair, and draped it over my shoulders as I settled into the outdoor sofa. Let's all stay a little longer, I said casually. I'd like us to discuss property boundaries. Callista's mouth opened slightly, confusion creeping in. Before she could say anything, I added, softly, precisely, Oh, don't worry. It's not for me. It's my lawyer who'll be joining us. My voice hadn't wavered. That was the part that shook them most. I returned to the deck with the same measured calm I'd left with. I leaned lightly against the doorframe, let the breeze catch my hair, and took in the silence I'd shattered. Callista blinked fast, her lips parting like she wanted to object, but couldn't find the right angle. My mother's expression was harder to read, somewhere between contempt and calculation. Let's go inside, I said, my tone smooth as glass. The rooms are ready. The hallway to the guest wing was long and quiet, lit by warm sconces that cast soft shadows across the pale wood floor. I walked ahead, heels gentle on the planks. Behind me, I could hear the uneven rhythm of their steps, Callista lagging slightly, my mother keeping pace with more effort than grace. I stopped by the first guest room and opened the door. The bed inside was simple, neatly made with white linens, no frills, no coastal decor, just clean and functional. I gestured toward it. This one's yours, Callista. She blinked again. It's just a bed. It's a guest room, I replied, not a suite at the Four Seasons. I moved down the hallway to the next room and opened the door with the same deliberate motion. And here's yours, Mother. There was a pause. I turned to face them both in the narrow hallway. This isn't a vacation. You're here because I allowed it. Don't mistake proximity for privilege. Mother let out a short laugh, dry and defensive. Is this your way of punishing us, Adeline? Stripping away comfort? I thought you were above pettiness. I tilted my head, my voice soft. No, I'm just setting boundaries, something this family never taught me to do. Her face tightened. We always supported you. You just never let us in. That's not true, I said, stepping back into the middle of the hallway. You never even tried to come in. You made sure I stayed on the outside. Callista folded her arms. Here we go again. I want to make something clear, I said, cutting her off. This house? It wasn't gifted to me. I bought it. On my own. Mother's lips parted, offended. That's not how we remember it. I let out a breath, steady, controlled. The hallway seemed to narrow around us. Of course it's not, because the version you tell people makes you sound generous. Their silence didn't surprise me. I'd rehearsed this confrontation for years, never sure if it would ever happen. I was 20, I continued. I worked 3 jobs and saved every dime. I signed those papers alone. No down payment from you, no co-signing. Just me and a loan officer who didn't even look me in the eye. Mother sniffed, almost a scoff. That was years ago. Yes, and you still go around telling people you helped me get on my feet. You didn't. You stood by while I sank. I walked into the second guest room, grabbed the armchair by the window, and began shifting it toward the wall. The legs scraped softly against the floor. You can set your things here, I said. You each get a room, that's all. You don't own any part of this house, And you don't get to act like you do." The sound of furniture being dragged punctuated the air like punctuation in a heated letter. The act felt symbolic and necessary. They weren't just guests. They were reminders of every time I was told I was less than, undeserving, disposable. Mother stepped inside, her voice brittle. "You think you have all the answers now, that house of yours, this career, your big words. But you didn't get there alone." "No," I said, facing her. "I got there despite you." Her face stiffened. Callista rolled her eyes, but I noticed the twitch in her jaw. "You want to rewrite history, Adeline?" Mother said. "You think it was easy raising 2 girls on my own while your father worked 10-hour days?" "You didn't raise me," I answered almost gently. "You ranked me. Callista was the daughter. I was the default. I got whatever she didn't want. Her old clothes, her leftover time, her hand-me-down affection." A sharp wind hit the windows then, as if the house itself had taken a breath. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Callista stepped forward. "Poor you," she said, voice mocking. "Still crying about high school? You're a grown woman, Adeline. You have this house, your career. What more do you want? A medal?" I didn't look at her. I bent slightly to adjust the bedspread, smoothing a wrinkle. "No," I said. "I want the truth to matter." That's when I heard small feet padding softly behind me. I turned and saw Maya at the door, clutching the tiny shell she'd found earlier. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. I knelt down and opened my hand. She placed the shell in my palm. "I found it again," she whispered. "It was under the chair." I smiled. "Thank you, baby. It's even more special now." Her presence reminded me that not all inheritance is material. Some is emotional, passed down through looks, words, and silence. I looked at her, then glanced up at my mother and Callista. "You didn't ask to be born into this mess," I told Maya, "but I promise you, I got you." She smiled softly and ran back down the hallway. As I stood, I noticed Callista's face had turned red, not from embarrassment, but frustration. She hated not being the center. Mother's gaze followed Maya's retreating form with a hint of unease. I walked past them both, heading toward the kitchen again. I picked up my phone. The air was tense, but no one followed. I made the call casually, leaning against the counter. "Hey," I said. "Yeah, I need you to come by. Yes, tonight. The conversation just got interesting." I hung up and returned down the hallway. Both of them stood near the guest rooms, uncertain. "We're all staying in tonight," I said smoothly. "And tomorrow morning I'd like us to discuss property boundaries." Mother bristled. Callista blinked rapidly. Then, as Callista opened her mouth, probably ready to protest again, I cut her off with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, don't worry," I said. "It's not for me. It's my lawyer who'll be joining us." I didn't chase after her. I didn't shout or slam a door. I just let the words echo in the air between us, like a bell you can't unring. Maya's eyes were still wide when I turned to her, those big, gentle eyes trying to understand why someone who smiled during dinner had just stabbed me with words that had taken years to forget. Back in her room, she held her stuffed dolphin like it was armor. I sat beside her on the edge of the bed and smoothed the blanket over her legs. The house creaked faintly as the wind picked up outside. "Mom," she whispered, "what did Grandma mean when she said you were a charity case?" The room felt smaller all of a sudden. I reached for words that wouldn't bruise her. "She said it because sometimes when people feel powerless, they use cruel words to make themselves feel tall. Doesn't mean they're true." She blinked up at me. "But why would someone say that to their own kid?" I kissed her forehead. "Because not everyone knows how to love right. But that's not your job to fix." She didn't say anything else, just tucked her arms beneath the blanket. I turned off the lamp by her bedside, leaving the soft amber hallway light to spill in through the door. Before leaving, I paused. "You are loved, Maya. No conditions, no exceptions." She nodded sleepily, her grip on the dolphin loosening. I closed the door halfway and leaned against the frame for a moment, letting the quiet hold me. I made my way down the hallway, barefoot on the cool hardwood, and slipped into my study. The small lamp on my desk flickered on with a soft click, casting light over old paperwork, a worn copy of East of Eden, and a photo in a silver frame. My grandmother, leaning on her cane in front of her tomato plants, smiled back at me from the picture. That photo had followed me from apartment to apartment, even when I had nothing else. I thought I could bury it all in silence, I murmured aloud. Thought if I didn't bring them here, they couldn't touch what I built. But somehow they had found their way in, still cutting with the same dull blade, still acting like I owed them peace after all the wreckage. My mind drifted to a memory I hadn't pulled out in years. I was 12. My birthday had fallen on a Wednesday, and my parents forgot. Or maybe they didn't forget, just didn't care enough to do anything. That night they brought out a cake, but it was already half-eaten. I knew it was Callista's from the weekend before. Her name had been scraped off in frosting, replaced with mine. A crooked pink candle stood where 3 had been melted before. I remember standing in the kitchen, trying to smile, pretending not to notice the corner already cut out. And then I heard my mother's voice through the half-open pantry door. "Just use what's left. We shouldn't waste good frosting." That one line. It sank in deeper than any scream. I rubbed my temples and stood up, glancing toward the hallway. The house was still. 10 minutes later, I called them into the study. I didn't raise my voice or send a message. I just waited for them to wander in. They came in together, stiff and unsure, like guests who'd realized the dinner party had ended early. I motioned for them to sit, but neither did. "This won't take long," I said, calm but firm. "In this house, you don't speak that way. Not to me, not in front of Maya. If you do, you won't be welcome here again." My mother scoffed, arms crossed. "We're family, Adeline. Don't get dramatic." Callista muttered, "You always loved making a scene." I took a slow breath. "No, I spent years keeping the peace. That's not the same thing." "You wouldn't even have this place if we hadn't—" "Helped me?" I cut her off, looking directly at Callista. "You didn't. You told people you did, but I worked 3 jobs to afford a moldy apartment. I signed every loan, I paid every bill. Alone." The silence grew brittle. "This home?" I nodded around. "Paid in full, no cosigner, no trust fund, no handouts." Mother shifted on her feet. "We tried to give you what we could. You gave me leftover birthday cakes and the couch when Callista didn't want her room anymore. Don't rewrite it." She didn't speak again. I walked over to the counter and poured myself a cup of tea. The kettle had been left warm earlier. The silence thickened as they watched me, expecting me to offer them some, maybe to break the tension with hospitality. I didn't. Instead, I took a slow sip, met their eyes over the rim, and said nothing. That moment was louder than anything I could have said. When they finally turned to leave, I followed them to the door of the study. They paused there, waiting. For what, I don't know. Maybe some old version of me to fold. Maybe an apology I'd spent my whole life giving them for things that weren't mine to carry. But I didn't fold. As I reached for the doorknob, I leaned in slightly, just enough for them to hear. "You won't like who I become next." And then, I closed the door. I didn't slam the door behind them. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, hand resting on the knob, listening to the faint echo of their footsteps on the gravel path. The night had fallen into that deep stillness only the ocean knows, where every movement feels magnified, and just before I closed the door I whispered back, "You won't like who I become next." I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I drifted in and out, staring at the ceiling, hearing the waves crash faintly beyond the windows, and watching the moonlight slide across the floor like a patient intruder. Around 5, I gave up pretending and got out of bed. Maya was still curled under her blanket, breathing softly. I moved quietly, making my way into the garden through the side door. The morning air was cool enough to wrap around my skin like a warning. I stepped barefoot into the damp grass and walked toward the little patch I'd tried, year after year, to keep alive. I pulled on my gloves and started clearing a few weeds near the rose bushes, letting my hands move on instinct. The silence this morning didn't feel like peace. It felt like pressure, like the air was waiting for me to say something, to admit something. Maybe I'd stayed silent too long. Maybe being the quiet one wasn't strength. It was surrender. I looked up toward the horizon and whispered, not to anyone in particular, was I really too quiet for too long? That thought carried me back, suddenly, sharply, to the year I turned 16. It was during spring term. I had stayed late at school because Mr. Hansen, the guidance counselor, had asked to meet with me. I remember being nervous, smoothing the sleeves of my thrift store cardigan, thinking maybe I was in trouble. Instead, he smiled kindly and said, "Adeline, we've nominated you for the State College Prep program. It's selective and free. You'd spend 6 weeks on campus this summer. It's a chance to get ahead, especially for students like you." I remember blinking. Students like me? Bright, resilient, underestimated, he said. The forms needed a parent's signature. So he called home. They came, my mother and Callista. I was excited, naive enough to think they'd be proud. But before Mr. Hansen could finish explaining, my mother cut in. "She won't be going. She needs to be home this summer. We've got things she needs to do around the house." Mr. Hansen blinked, confused. "But this is a rare opportunity. Adeline has real potential." "She's not college material anyway," Callista chimed in, chewing her gum like she was bored out of her mind. "She freezes in front of people. She's not leadership material. She's fine where she is." I remember how the warmth left my body. I remember how Mr. Hansen looked at me, stunned, like he didn't know what to say. And I remember nodding, slowly, like I was the one turning it down. That was the year I learned to disappear. Back in the garden, I crouched near the edge of the plot and brushed away some dead leaves. My hand landed on a small green patch, unexpected. A strawberry plant. Not new, but not one I remembered planting either. I stared at it for a second before it clicked. My grandmother had given it to me years ago, wrapped in a newspaper with a scribbled note, "Root this when you feel ready. It'll wait." I had buried it out here once after she died and forgotten about it. And yet, it had taken root. Quietly. Alone. And now, somehow, it was thriving. I sat back, wiping the dirt off my gloves, watching how the sunlight hit its little red fruit. I hadn't been invisible all these years. I'd just been buried. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to grow again. A few minutes later, I walked inside. The house was still quiet. I brewed coffee, moving around the kitchen in slow, deliberate movements. I cracked 2 eggs into a pan, mostly out of habit. Something about the rhythm of breakfast grounded me. I didn't hear her come in. My mother's voice floated behind me like a draft. "You've always been the stable one." I didn't respond at first. I finished flipping the eggs, poured my coffee, and set the mug gently on the counter. Then I turned. She was leaning against the doorway like nothing had happened last night, like she hadn't insulted me in front of my daughter. "That's why we never worried about you," she continued, smoothing the sleeve of her cardigan. "You were the one we could count on." I stared at her. That wasn't a compliment. That was dismissal. That was code for, "We didn't need to protect you, so we didn't." It hit deeper than I expected. "You never worried about me," I said slowly, "because you assumed I'd survive, no matter what you did. Or didn't do." She smiled faintly. "Well, you did survive, didn't you?" I turned away. I stared out the window above the sink. The strawberry plant peeked through the edge of the garden bed. I thought about how long it had waited, how long it had grown silently under the soil. All it needed was a bit of light. Behind me, I heard her moving around, opening cabinets, acting like she belonged in this space. Like this house wasn't a sanctuary I'd built from the ruins she left me in. "You know," she said lightly, "Callista's just under a lot of pressure. She didn't mean anything by it last night. You should be the bigger person." I stayed quiet. She sighed like I was exhausting her. And then She said it. I can't even write it here. Not yet. Not without my hands shaking. But I will tell you this. The second her words left her mouth, something inside me snapped. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there, stone still, and the glass in my hand slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tile. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. My fingers were still trembling when I set the broken shards aside and reached for the paper towel roll. I didn't say a word. I couldn't, not yet. The words my mother had just dropped into the air still hovered like smoke that refused to clear. This house was always meant to be shared. You didn't really think it was just yours, did you? She'd said it so casually, almost with a smirk, as if decades of sweat and solitude could be split like a birthday cake. I walked away without looking back, not to be polite, but because if I stayed I might have said something I'd regret, or worse, something I wouldn't. I moved down the hallway into my office, the only place in this house that still felt untouched by them. I shut the door quietly, but the sound rang in my ears like thunder. I reached for my desk drawer without thinking, pulling out an old file folder, one that had followed me through 5 cities, 3 jobs, and 1,000 silent compromises. It held a photo. There I was, 19, exhausted, kneeling behind the counter of a gas station in worn-out sneakers and a smudged name tag. I'd taken that picture myself on a disposable camera just to prove to someone, anyone, that I was trying. I was real, and I'd kept it to remind myself where I came from, who I had to be, why I didn't owe anyone anything now, except that wasn't what my family believed. 10 years ago, I'd shared a business pitch with Callista, a tiny side idea during our 3rd year out of high school. We were young, broke, and desperate. I wrote the proposal. She typed it up. We agreed to apply for a local startup grant under both our names, but when the grant came through, the check was addressed only to her. She laughed it off, said it was just easier for tax reasons. Then she bought herself a new laptop and forgot to return my calls. I never followed up. Never asked why my name wasn't anywhere on the LLC filings. I was too tired, too used to disappearing. And somewhere inside, I think I believed maybe I didn't deserve credit. Now here they were again, reaching for things that weren't theirs. I stood and wandered back into the kitchen, if only to grab another cup of coffee before I lost my nerve completely. And that's when I saw it, the mug on the counter. It was a simple thing, cream-colored with a tiny chip on the handle and a faded blue rim. My grandmother's mug, the one I'd tucked away carefully in the back of the cabinet years ago after she passed. I hadn't touched it since. Now it sat there, used. Lipstick print smeared at the edge. Not mine. I stared at it too long. The whole room went quiet in my chest. That mug wasn't just ceramic. It was my memory of warm afternoons and whispered recipes, of hands that made everything feel safe. And now it was just another object they felt entitled to. Like my house, my story, my silence. I took the mug and set it gently into the sink, barely breathing. Upstairs, I could hear Callista's voice echoing down the hall, some flippant comment about how this place could really use a full-time decorator. And my mother laughed. It wasn't just the mug, it was the way they peeled pieces off me slowly. A word here, a glance there, a casual claim over everything I built, and then acted like it was theirs all along. I walked back to my office, locked the door, and sat on the floor. Cross-legged, like I used to sit when I was little, and confused. I stared at the photo again. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I'd made it too easy. Always the dependable one, the strong one, the she'll be fine one. Maybe that's why they thought they could take and take, because I never screamed, never flinched, never asked for anything back. Maybe they thought I liked being invisible. But just as that thought took hold, there was a soft knock on the door. "Adeline?" It was Maya. Her voice always had a way of pulling me back to the present. I opened the door, just enough to see her small hands holding a plate. "I brought you some toast. And an apple." I gave her a tired smile and took the plate. She hesitated, then looked up. "Why do they treat you like you owe them something?" I froze. She wasn't being rude. She didn't mean it as judgment. It was just a question. Honest, clean, painful. I sat on the edge of the desk, toast untouched, and stared out the window while she padded back to the guest room. That one sentence bounced around in my chest like a pinball. Why did they? And why had I let them? I wasn't showing her love by staying silent. I was teaching her that love meant bending until you broke. That family meant debt, not dignity, and I wouldn't do that to her. Not anymore. I set the plate down, wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, and unlocked the office door. My feet felt solid on the hardwood now. No more wobble, no more swallowing things I should say. In the kitchen, my mother was pouring herself another cup of coffee. Callista was scrolling through her phone like this was a hotel lounge. I stepped forward, steady and clear. "There's something you both need to hear." And that's when I knew I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I didn't slam the door or shout. I just made a call and started packing. The sound of my own voice, calm and measured as I spoke with my attorney, surprised even me. There was no shaking, no hesitation. Just the facts, laid out like the blueprints of a house I was finally ready to build for myself. I came back into the kitchen, the light from the windows casting long golden lines across the floor. My mother and Callista were still standing there, exactly where I'd left them, frozen like two figures from an argument that had gone stale. "I spoke to my lawyer," I said, placing my phone face down on the table. "You'll be getting the documents shortly." My mother narrowed her eyes. "What documents?" "The deed," I answered, voice even. "This house isn't shared. It's mine, fully and legally. I pay the taxes. You're here because I allowed it, not because you earned it." Callista scoffed. "Oh, so now you think you're some kind of queen because you have a house by the beach." "You always thought you were better than us," my mother added, voice rising like a kettle finally reaching boil. "You think you're some kind of savior, don't you? Just because you didn't end up pregnant at 20 or working night shifts at the diner?" I didn't answer. I just looked at them. It was strange. There used to be a time when those words would have hit me like bricks. Now they just floated in the air, desperate, weightless, like smoke trying to find something to cling to. Inside, my thoughts were steadier than they'd ever been. I spent my whole life lowering my light so they'd feel taller, shrinking myself down so no one would accuse me of arrogance, pretending to be average when all I wanted was to be seen. They didn't break me. I trained myself to disappear, and now that I'd stopped disappearing, they didn't know what to do with me. I walked to the cabinet drawer near the sink and pulled out a thick envelope, one I'd kept sealed for years. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From release. Inside was the copy of the deed, the one signed over to me years ago, by my father. Most people thought I bought this house after my first consulting win, but that wasn't the full story. After he passed, my father had quietly left me the property in a separate, private agreement. It wasn't in the main will. It had been his way of giving me something, without the noise. I'd asked my attorney to keep it quiet, to avoid the drama, but silence only fed the entitlement. So now? It was time. I opened the envelope and laid the document on the table. "You can read it for yourself." Callista snatched it. Her eyes scanned the lines, and I could see the moment she registered the signature. This was years ago," she stammered. "You hid this?" "No," I said. "I protected it." My mother leaned over her shoulder, then stepped back like she'd touched a live wire. "Your father, he didn't." "He did," I said. "You just never asked. You assumed." There was silence, the kind that clings to your skin. Then my mother changed her tone, softer, calculated. "Adeline, sweetheart, what about Maya? You really want her to grow up without her grandmother? Without family?" I turned. Maya was sitting on the carpet in the living room, legs crossed, coloring quietly like the world wasn't spinning sideways in the next room. I knelt beside her. "Sweetheart," I said gently, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Do you know what family means?" She looked up at me, puzzled. "People who love you?" "That's right," I said. "And do you know what love isn't?" She blinked. "Love isn't taking things that don't belong to you. It isn't saying mean things and expecting someone to smile anyway, and it definitely isn't making someone feel small." I glanced back at my mother. "You are my family, Maya. You and no one else in this house defines that for me." Maya smiled and reached for my hand. Behind me, the air in the kitchen dropped a few degrees. Callista wasn't done. She stormed toward my office, muttering, "Fine. You want to play games? Let's play. I'll pack up what's mine. Don't touch a thing." I followed her, not in panic, but in observation. She yanked open desk drawers, pulled out files, her voice rising like a child mid-tantrum. "You think this is over? I'm calling Mom's pastor, the board at her charity. Let's see what they think of your little ego trip." I didn't respond. I just turned around and walked out. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water, walked out onto the balcony and leaned against the railing. The cold air from the ocean slapped gently against my skin, steadying my breath. I stared at the waves for a while. This time I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. I could still hear Maya giggling in the background, her voice like a bell, clear and soft. That laugh was the reason I wouldn't waver. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it because some things, like peace, safety, and truth, deserve to take up space. Then, the doorbell rang. It was sharp. Twice. Callista poked her head out from the hallway. "What now? If that's the police, you'll regret this." I didn't blink. "I hope it is." I walked toward the front door, heart steady, steps measured. And that's when I opened the door to the living room and saw the city assessor standing there, clipboard in hand. I didn't flinch. The door opened with a quiet groan, and the ocean breeze followed the city assessor inside, stirring the scent of salt and tension. He held a clipboard under one arm and nodded politely, his demeanor professional and detached, exactly the kind of presence the room needed. "Good afternoon," he said, scanning the room. "I'm here on behalf of the city to verify records on the property. Miss Adeline Marsh?" I raised my hand slightly. "That's me." He gave a crisp nod, stepping in as Callista crossed her arms like a barricade and my mother sat stiffly on the couch, hands clasped too tight. "We've received a query concerning ownership," he continued, flipping through the pages. "But everything in the public registry confirms you as the sole legal owner. Title, taxes, and transfer deed all list your name exclusively." Callista barked out a laugh, sharp, brittle, and too loud for the quiet room. "This is a joke, right? This has to be some kind of mistake." I said nothing. Just glanced at Maya, who sat quietly at the edge of the couch, a sketchbook open on her lap. Her pencil had stilled. My mother blinked, and I watched the fight slip out of her face. Not defeat, yet, but confusion, denial. Her hands were shaking. I stepped into the center of the room and placed a sealed envelope on the coffee table. A simple, nondescript envelope, the edges worn with age. I'd kept it untouched until now. "I was told not to use this unless it became necessary," I said softly. Today felt like that day. The assessor looked to me. "Would you like this entered into record?" "No, just opened." I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was my father's, slanted, measured, familiar like the hum of an old engine. I cleared my throat and read aloud. "To my daughter, Adeline, you carried the weight none of them noticed. This home is not a reward, it's a refuge for the one who never asked for anything but gave everything." A silence fell like fog over the room. I didn't need to look up to feel the shift. Callista muttered, "This is fake. You probably typed that up yourself." But her voice lacked the venom. It was cracked glass. I turned and walked toward the bookshelf, gently lifting a shadow box frame. Inside was a single brass key, tarnished with time, its edges smooth from handling. My father had given it to me one afternoon when I was 17, no explanation, just placed it in my palm and said, "For later." I framed it years later, not knowing why I couldn't bear to lose it. My mother's voice rose, shrill, brittle. "So now you're going to act like you're some martyr? Like he chose you over his own wife?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked back toward her, calm as the tide rolling in. "No," I said. "He didn't choose between us. He just saw me. Maybe for the first time." She stood then, voice sharp. "You've always tried to divide us. Drive a wedge. Make yourself the victim." I shook my head. "No, I stopped letting you turn me against myself." Maya, still quiet, reached up and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. She didn't speak, but her presence said enough. I didn't cry. I breathed. Then came the chime of my phone. I picked it up and put the lawyer on speaker. His voice filled the room like a gavel. "Miss Marsh, as discussed, I've submitted verification to both city records and the sheriff's office. Any continued attempts to intimidate you or dispute the property, especially after today's visit, will be treated as harassment. You have every right to issue a trespass notice." Just then, a knock echoed from the front door. "I'll get it," I said, already moving. My mother turned to Callista with panic in her eyes. "What did you do?" "I just asked Officer Burke to swing by," Callista snapped, trying to sound confident, "to assess the situation." When I opened the door, Officer Burke stood outside, clipboard in hand. I stepped aside and let him in. He reviewed the documents in silence, then looked directly at my mother and Callista. "Everything checks out. This isn't a domestic dispute, it's a legal matter. I suggest you respect the terms laid out and leave peacefully." Callista's mouth twisted. She looked around wildly as if hoping someone would rescue her narrative. Then her eyes landed on the photo frame beside the TV, one of us as kids. She grabbed it and hurled it across the room. Glass shattered. The sound startled even the officer. "He never loved you," she screamed. "He pitied you. That's all it was." I didn't move, just looked at her and said, "And yet, I'm the one still standing. With peace." My mother didn't scream, didn't cry. She just sank down onto the couch, staring at the floor, then at the walls. Her voice, when it came, was faint. "This place used to mean something." I walked over and picked up the broken frame. A photo of me, maybe 9 years old, wearing one of Callista's old sweaters. I remembered the scratchy sleeves. "It still does," I said, brushing off a shard of glass. "Just not what you thought." Time passed slowly after that. The sky outside turned from gold to a quiet gray. One by one they gathered their things, not speaking, just leaving. Maya helped me straighten the books on the shelf. She didn't ask questions. She just moved with me, as if understanding the weight of what had been carried, and finally sat down. I walked them to the door. No hugs, no apologies, just silence and cold air. Once they were gone, I locked the door and stood for a moment in the center of the room. It was the same room, but not the same story. The photo frame still lay cracked on the floor. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I turned off the lights and sat down on the couch. The wind outside whispered across the window panes. And for the first time in a long time, the house was still. The house was finally quiet. Too quiet. But the scars they left behind, still loud. I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, listening to the waves and letting silence do what apologies never could. Morning light was creeping over the dunes, soft and clean, like nothing had ever been broken here. But I knew better. And somehow knowing better didn't sting the way it used to. Maya was still asleep upstairs. I could hear the faint rhythm of her breathing through the open screen door. That alone made this house feel sacred. No yelling, no slammed doors, just her little breath, steady as the tide. I held the mug between my palms, not for the heat, it had gone lukewarm, but for the weight. It anchored me. The seagulls argued over a crust of something down by the water. Farther off, a couple walked a golden retriever, its paws kicking up sand as it bounced ahead of them. I sat there long enough to watch the sun rise fully over the sea, warm light spilling across the floorboards at my feet. They left no bruises this time, I murmured into the quiet, just the echo of being unwanted and the strength of not needing to be. A little later, I heard small feet padding across the wood floors. Maya peeked out, rubbing one eye. Her curls were a tangled mess of sleep and yesterday's beach wind. "Hey, Mama," she said, voice scratchy. "Hey, baby." She curled up next to me on the porch swing, her head resting against my side. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. After breakfast, cereal and quiet smiles, she wandered into my study. I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing out the mugs, taking my time. When I finally stepped into the study, there was something new on the desk. It was a piece of construction paper. Purple, her favorite. A crayon drawing of the beach house. Yellow walls, blue roof, hearts in every window. Below it, scrawled in her loopy handwriting, "Thank you for the house. It feels like you." I stared at it for a long moment before I noticed the object taped beside it. The key. The same old brass key my father had handed me years ago. No explanation, just pressed into my palm one afternoon when no one was looking. I'd framed it, kept it behind glass like a question I never got to ask, but Maya had removed it from the frame. Now it sat beside her drawing, exposed, real. Not an artifact, not a riddle, just a key, and suddenly it meant something else. That key used to represent escape, freedom from whatever cage they'd locked me in. Now, it felt like choice, like roots, like I finally got to decide who walked through my doors, and who didn't. I placed a hand over the note and whispered, "You gave me more than a house, Daddy." A knock at the door startled me gently from that moment. It was our neighbor, Mr. Ingram, holding a cup of coffee and a lazy grin. "Morning," he said, handing it over. "Didn't mean to interrupt, just figured you could use a refill." "Always," I smiled, taking the cup. He lingered a second. "Hey, you hear about Callista?" I raised an eyebrow. "Word is someone tipped off the city. Her business filings, turns out they weren't all clean. Investigators came by this morning." I said nothing, just nodded. "Oh, and your mom?" He lowered his voice like someone might be eavesdropping. "She tried to file for assistance, but apparently there's some inconsistencies with her tax history. Got flagged." I sipped the coffee. Vanilla. Too sweet. But I didn't flinch. "That's not my storm to dance in anymore," I said gently. He chuckled. "Well, looks like they finally met a wall they couldn't sweet talk." After he left, I helped Maya get ready for school. She hummed while brushing her hair, off-key and adorable. On the walk to the car, she skipped ahead, her backpack bouncing with every step. At the school gate, her teacher waved. "She's blossomed since the move," the teacher said. "She's not the only one," I replied, and I meant it. Back home, I walked through the house slowly, as if seeing it for the first time. No more shadows in the corners, just space, breathable and wide. I stopped in the study again. The broken photo frame that once held a family picture had been put away in the drawer. I hadn't thrown it out, but I no longer needed it on display. In its place was a new frame. Maya's purple note, crayon hearts and all. And beside it, the old brass key. I ran a finger across the glass. "They trained me to survive in silence," I said softly, "but I rebuilt in peace, on my own terms." Have you ever had to walk away from the people who called it love, but showed you pain? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. And remember, silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's survival.